Greetings, sir. We are Kapwa Dangal ng Bayan, and our group consists of
Mariel Nicole R. Arevalo,
Catherine Belio,
Christian M. Ignacio,
Alsen Kapitbahay,
Mark Jubal A. Mingito.
I am Ryan Per A. Polinar.
Oliver Manuel C. Titos.
Revelyn Joy R. Salasiban,
Lawrence Andrew B. Santos,
and Lorenzo M. Tagalog Jr.
We created a web application using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery that allows users to interact in the events management and reservation system of an events management firm to be developed with account management, login logout module, content management, transaction management, and report generation.
In local storage, we have used the following keys. User ID key, a unique identifier for new users. User list key, an array storing user class objects with user details. Current user key for ID of currently logged in user updated on logout or login. Event ID key as identifier for new events added by admin.
Event list key, an array holding events class objects with event details which has the properties ID, event type, address, capacity, price, description, and background image link, and a transact ID key for ID assigned to new transaction requests.
Addition to that are the transact list key, which is for array storing transaction class objects with the properties transact ID, user ID, full name, transaction, date of transaction, transaction status, reservation list key. An array containing reservation transaction class objects contains properties transaction ID, user ID, full name, contact number, date of transaction, transact status, and event object.
Event object, an object of reserved events class holding event details, and payment transact list key, used as an array for storing payment class objects for payment transactions with the properties transaction ID, user ID, full name, date, amount, and status.
Following will be our classes. In this part, in order to represent the user object, we used user class. The user.js contains constructor parameters such as user ID, username, password, lname, fname, contact, and account type. The said parameters are used for initializing properties of user object.
Using this keyword, we'll assign the provided values to respective properties of the user object. This makes each instance of the user class to have their own unique set of property values.
Using this class can create user objects with specific properties and can easily create instances of these objects with dissimilar values for each user in your application. The user object can now be used to manage user-related data and functionality within your application.
Events JavaScript contains a class called events which represent an event object. It contains a constructor function that consists of parameters ID, event type, address, capacity, price, description, BG image link, which values will be assigned to each of the class properties.
Inside this constructor, there is an assigned value for the corresponding properties of events object using the this keyword, which allows each instance of the events class to contain its own unique properties value. Through using events class, we are able to create event objects with specific properties and can easily create instances of the said objects with different values for each given event.
The reserved events class is used for creating reserved event objects. It has a constructor method that initializes the attributes of a reserved event using the provided properties. These parameters store information and define the attributes of a reserved event, including event type, event name, date, time, location, guest count, inclusion, and price.
We declared a class called reservation transaction that has a constructor method that is called when creating a new instance of the reservation transaction class. The constructor method has 7 parameters named transaction ID, user ID, full name, contact number, date of transact, transact status, and event object.
Inside the constructor, the properties of reservation transaction object are initialized using the provided parameter values. Each parameter is assigned to the corresponding property of the object using the this keyword. By creating instances of reservation transaction class with different values for the parameters, you can create individual reservation transaction objects with unique information for each reservation.
We declared a class called transaction that represents a transaction object. The class has a constructor method that is called when creating a new instance of the transaction class and has 6 parameters named
Transact ID, which is a unique identifier for the transaction. User ID, which is the user ID associated with the transaction. Full name for the full name of the user involved in the transaction. Transaction for the type of transaction, either reservation or payment. Date of transaction for the date of the transaction. Transaction status for the status of the transaction.
Inside the constructor, the properties of the transaction object are initialized using the provided parameter values. Each parameter is assigned to the corresponding property of the object using the this keyword. By creating instances of the transaction class with different values for the parameters, you can create individual transaction objects with unique information for each transaction. These objects can be used to track and manage transactions within an application.
The payment class has a constructor method that takes in 6 parameters: transaction ID, user ID, full name, date, amount, and status. These parameters are used to initialize the corresponding properties of the created payment object. By defining the payment class, you can create new payment objects by using the new keyword followed by invoking the class constructor with appropriate arguments.
In this area, this will be what our users will see. In the internal script, we first instantiated 2 global variables which were selected event ID and current user ID, where the former is for storing the event ID and the latter is for storing the user's ID.
The click inquire button function, which is executed on load of the website. With this function, whenever the user clicks an element with the class name action, that element will fade in of the inquiry form. If the user clicks an element with class close or outside the modal window, then modal will fade out.
Next function is save transaction, which is executed upon clicking the inquire button. This retrieves the data inputted in the form and checks if there is an existing transaction or reservation list in the browser's local storage. If it exists, the value of the local storage will be updated, and if it's not, then it will create a new transaction list, then assign the retrieved values to the key. After that, input fields will be cleared and the form will fade out.
Last function is the display event info, is used to retrieve user information and input it in the form that is created upon clicking the inquire button.
The JavaScript part of this code provides a functionality for the user account page. The user class defined in here represents the user object with properties such as user ID, username, password, last name, first name, contact, account type, and user transactions. An array for storing transactions objects.
The click pay button function sets up event handlers for showing and hiding the payment modal when the pay button is clicked. The display details function retrieves the user account details from local storage based on the current user ID and displays them on the page.
The edit credentials function allows the user to edit their credentials by enabling input fields and updating the account details in local storage when the save button is clicked.
The display transaction details function retrieves the user's transactions from the local storage and displays them in a table on the page. It also adds a pay button for transactions that are approved but unpaid.
The proceed payment function handles the payment process by creating a new transaction object and storing it in local storage. The clear fields function clears the input fields in the payment module.
Inside the account script.js includes display details, which retrieves and displays user information from local storage. Edit credentials that enables editing of user credentials, switching between edit and save modes. Save details used for saving updated user details to local storage. Display transaction details, used to retrieve transaction information and populate a table.
The proceed payment method processes payment by creating transaction and payment objects. Display transaction details displays details of selected payment and reservation transaction in a model. The display event details method displays details of selected events in a model, and the display my events method is an incomplete function that likely handles display of user-specific events.
On the user, we also have the admin side. Click Add BTN method sets up event handlers for opening and closing of modal dialog to add events. The following will be event handlers for navigation buttons, show accounts, show events, show transaction, show reports, hide show different section. The click transaction details method sets up event handlers for opening and closing a modal dialog to view transaction details.
The click update button method sets up event handlers for opening and closing modal dialog to update an event. It also pre-populates form fields. Add events method is used to add a new event by retrieving input values, creating an event object and storing it in event list, local storage. Update event method for updating a selected event with modified values stores an update event in the event list.
Update CMS button function used to dynamically update action buttons for events to show update and delete options. Display admin function displays admin user details in form fields. On the contrary, update admin function is used to update admin user details with modified values and stores updated details in the user list. Click View Details function, which sets up event handler for closing a modal dialog to view event details.
Display transactions retrieves transaction data and displays it in a table. Sets up event handlers for inquiries, payments, and details. Next, process inquiry, updates status of reservation transaction, updates corresponding transactions in transact list and reservation list. Then process payment, updates status of payment transaction, updates corresponding transactions in transact list and payment transact list. And delete event deletes selected events from event list.
First is a display data function that displays the data retrieved from an array of objects through an iteration to create a table called trivial accounts. Also, if the user's ID is 1, which is an ID for admin, it will have an update button for enabling the admin to edit his or her credential in the row, otherwise it will have a delete button enabling the admin to delete the user.
Next is delete user account function that simply removes a table row in the table and in the array of objects upon clicking the delete button. Following that is the edit credentials function, which retrieves the currently logged in user from the local storage and allows updates on the input fields containing the user's information in a modal form.
Display admin displays admin user details in form fields. Update admin updates admin user details with modified values. Stores updated details in user list.
An event listener is also added in the close button that will trigger a function called close modal. When the button is clicked, the function will hide the modal form by setting the display style of the modal update admin element into none when it is triggered. Additionally, by clicking outside the container of the modal, the form will also be hidden.
Display reserve events retrieves reserve events data and displays it in a table. Display transaction report retrieves transaction, reservation, and payment data. Displays transaction report table.
The display reservation transaction retrieves reservation data and displays it in a table with the option to view event details. Display payment transactions retrieve payment transaction data and displays it in a table.
Both the user side and admin side use the following JavaScript. We declare the function called createDummyData that is used to create and store dummy data data for users and events if they don't exist in the local storage.
Check credentials function is used to check the user's credential, username, and password in the stored user data in the local storage. It will be triggered by the login button. It retrieves the entered username and password from the input fields on the page and then loops through the stored user data and checks if there is a match. If a match is found, it sets the isValid boolean to true and stores the current user object in the current user variable. If the user is an admin, it sets the href attribute of an anchor tag to admin homepage.html. Otherwise, it will go to home.html.
The add new user function is defined to add a new user to the local storage based on the input values provided by the user. It creates a new user object with the entered data and adds it to the local storage user list, updates the user ID, and displays a success message.
In local storage, the code uses local storage to store and retrieve data, creating dummy user and event list if necessary. The user list stores user class instances with attributes like username, password, first name, last name, and contact number. The event list holds events class instances with attributes including event ID, name, location, capacity, price, description, and image URL.
The code assumes the presence of two classes, user and events, which are not displayed in the provided code. These classes are necessary for creating instances of users and events with their respective attributes.
We have a function called display list of events that creates item containers to display a list of events. It retrieves the event list from local storage and iterates over each event. The container structure includes div image container for event image, the div item body container for event information and action button.
Div overlay, an optional overlay container. Div event info, details of the event. Div additional info contains extra event details. Beta and inquire for the inquire button. The item container is appended to specific sections in the HTML document based on their IDs. If called in the user side, it appends to user services cont, and if it is called in the admin side, it appends before the abtn event.
Check fields validates input fields in a form. Display alerts if any field is empty. Check username availability. Compares entered username with existing usernames. And checks availability. Check password validity. Assess password validity based on length, 8 characters or more. Check phone number validity. Validates phone number by comparing with existing numbers, considering current user. Check inquiry field. Validate input fields in inquiry form, event name, date, time, number of guests. Display alert if any field is empty.
First, the user will log in on the login page, creating a local storage for dummy data. If the user doesn't have an account, they will be allowed and required to sign up on the sign up page. After logging in, the user will proceed to their homepage, which can be either for an admin or a regular user. There, the user can navigate the web page and its feature.
Inside the homepage, users will be focusing more on the services offered, which contains events to be booked for reservation by them. The user will decide to choose their desired event and fill up an inquiry form consisting of event name, date, time, number of guests, user's name and contact, then click the inquire button.
The account page contains access for users to change their details, to see their transaction and events, and to log out. Since the user is already booked for an event, the user will now wait for the admin to confirm its reservation, and the admin will now log in to check any reservation added.
Inside the admin are the list of accounts from admins and users which they can delete or update. When the admin clicks the Manage button, it will show all available event services they offer. They can add more events, update, or delete events.
A As for the transactions, the admin can access user's reservation. Admin can view the details given by the user and process the reservation, which will be received by the user and will allow them to pay for the reservation. Once paying is done, the transaction will appear to the admin where they can confirm the payment of the transaction. This will appear as payment received.
Since the payment has been confirmed by the admin, the reservation transaction status will be updated including the payment transaction. And in the user side, the reserved events will appear in My Events. All the actions done by the admin will automatically be visible in the report section. Reserved events, transactions, reservation transactions, and payment transactions.
Once both user and admin are satisfied with their transactions, they can now log out, which will be brought back to the login page.
And that concludes the presentation of our final project in client-side scripting.
We are Pablo and Maya. Thank you for watching.